The danger of moving more bits, this is something that we know has to happen right now. This conversation has to happen right now. There's not going to be less data moving forward. There's going to be more data moving forward, more sensors, more technology, more information to move, and how do we do that securely and safely? So I'd like to welcome to the stage Fred Bonewell, Chief Security and Safety Officer for CPS Energy. And I'd also like to welcome Will Garrett, VP and Director of Cybersecurity for Port San Antonio. And looks like we have our next panelist coming up, Amanda Kiermer, Acting Vice President and Deputy Director of San Antonio Chamber of Commerce. I won't make you run to the stage. Take your time, Amanda. Of course. Thank you for joining us all.
Great big entrance.
So thank you, everyone, for joining our panel. The dangers of moving more bits. So we're going to be talking about, what do we need to be considering as we're moving more information, both within, for entities and our communities. And so, Fred, I'll start with you to kick the conversation off very broadly. As infrastructure becomes increasingly connected, how do you start to safeguard both citizen and enterprise data?
First of all, we have to think broadly around the ability to enable this data to be connected. As soon as we start thinking narrowly, then we limit ourselves. And we also sub-optimize our company and our assets of this community. So in the vision of the future is that we have to create multiple endpoints for our customer. And there are solution sets that protect this data if utilized properly and if we're connected through the right partnerships to enable this data to be developed and utilized effectively and timely and today, not waiting for tomorrow, but today.
I see some head nodding. Amanda, any other thoughts on that?
No, I think Fred hit it.
Yeah. So how does the need for new technology and infrastructure impact data security and privacy? Amanda, what are you seeing at the Chamber of Commerce? How are you guys trying to understand the struggle for new technology and infrastructure and how it impacts data security and privacy?
I think it's a great question. I think it's something that makes San Antonio very unique too. As you can see on our panel, you have somebody from CPS Energy, you have somebody from the port, you have somebody from the chamber. Just this partnership alone is an example of how strong our community collaborates and how we prioritize collaboration and communication, working together is important, and then sharing information, right? So I know that sounds like a lot of mushy stuff, but it's that mushy, relationship-based strategy, information sharing that helps us be more secure. So infrastructure is important, but if we're not talking to one another, then it doesn't really help. And I think San Antonio does a really, really good job of being the model in the nation for public-private partnerships, for information sharing, for thinking bigger, and for creating a culture of security before it was even a thing, right? We have that here in San Antonio. It's ingrained in us. I think it's partly our military history, it's partly our community, right? This sense of taking care of one another. I think that overlaps into cybersecurity and information security. So for us, it's really exciting to see how we can play a role, bring industry to the table, bring those resources to the table, and then make sure that the workforce, in particular, and our educators, are providing this diverse pipeline of talent to solve these problems as well.
And Will, so Port San Antonio, what are you seeing around this need for new technology and upgrading infrastructure around data privacy and security?
Sure, and I think Amanda would concur with me that neither of us envy Fred's job. When you talk about, it's a delicate balance. When you just talk grid security as a whole, you think about these systems that were built to be off the network, pun intended, off the grid. And yet now you have much more in an energy utility, but CPS Energy specifically, that is working with smart meters and how to monitor demand, how to work with their customers to give them the option to decrease or increase demand in those peak periods. All of those new technologies are needed in terms of energy diversification, how you continue to grow with the population in San Antonio. But every single one of those new technologies creates a new, it's called vulnerability, a new hole, a new opening where bad actors could do bad things. I think from the privacy discussion, the interesting dynamic, and I know we're talking about it a lot at this event, from a smart San Antonio perspective, the smart city push, it is all about how do you connect citizens more effectively? How do you enhance quality of life, quality of space, quality of place? Again, all of those things pertain to collecting more data, having more open lines of communication, and you have, I think, the general citizen base that, at least those that are informed and choose to be, are concerned about their privacy and where's my data going and who's holding that data, who's sharing it. We see it kind of from a media perspective frequently tied to social media and some of those companies that will share the data and have been exposed for sharing it in maybe some ways the consumer didn't realize. But it's a need, and to Amanda's point, I think as a community we are building a collaborative ecosystem that's very unique nationally, but the privacy and the security of the data is something that I think too many communities push forward with rolling out the next cool smart city technology without thinking about the security behind it. And at the very baseline, you look at New York City as a model, rolled out 700 wireless kiosks to replace their payphones. And they didn't have web browser filters on those wireless kiosks. And so people thought it was funny to bring up sites they probably shouldn't bring up and leave them running on a wireless kiosk and walk away. So it's as simple as that to, if you were tracking transit data and security and information from a personal standpoint, how do you secure it? So I think it's a delicate balance because you have to, from a global competitive standpoint, move a city forward with new technology. I think San Antonio is doing it rather unique to what I've seen globally in how you build in security and privacy of that data from the start, not after the fact.
So let's get into that. And look, from the city perspective, there is a lot of new initiatives going on, services, programs, data sharing, and that requires a lot of different partners to be involved. Before we get into the particulars of San Antonio, just generally, Fred, why are partnerships helpful in solving some of these data privacy and security issues in communities? Why do you need to have those partnerships as opposed to really just having one entity trying to move forward and solve all of these problems?
This is a matter of creating a safe and secure sanctuary for our customers and the great community that we serve. But it's also thinking broadly around the regionalism aspects of what we do, from Dallas South in creating this cyber corridor that we're talking about. And, we're blessed for our number one customer to be JBSA in the military. And we have spent an inordinate amount of time over the past 2 years cultivating this partnership with the Department of Defense and specifically the Air Force. And we are a defense-sensitive grid here. And we don't take that lightly. And we also are well aware of the fact that we take a lot of hits to the grid and to our firewall every day. But we've got great systems and we've got great people behind those systems that help us enable those systems to be resilient. So what we're doing and what we have done is formed a CRADA agreement with the Air Force. So it's a collaborative research and development agreement with them where we can share data, we can share people to talk about common problems. It enables us to utilize certain systems that otherwise, without that agreement, we wouldn't have access to through the Department of Defense. So this is a very rich enablement strategy for us. And it's all about not taking lightly the fact that the military that serves this community has got to stay here. And it's not only got to stay here, but it's got to get bigger and better. And it just makes us even more effective as a community. And we need to be thinking about leading the nation in this. And we're thinking this way, then we'll create it this way, and we'll bring more jobs to the community. We'll in fact make this a cyber tech hub of the United States.
Yeah, I will pause that.
I love it.
Amanda, I'd like to pass it over to you. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just to go off of that, right? A lot of times we think of cybersecurity and hardening the grid. It's, a cyber technical job, but it's not, right? Like cybersecurity is everyone's job, right? And thinking about that, what does that mean What does that mean for me as a student? What does that mean for me as a dad? What does that mean for me as a baseball coach who's doing a fundraiser where you're collecting money and you have a website, right? There's all these different things to think about. Cybersecurity is everyone's job. And then on top of that, cybersecurity, as Fred said, is tied to national security, right? And you think of the nexus of federal partners who are here. So beyond Department of Defense, right? On the .gov side, we have federal partners here as well, from DHS, from Secret Service, other folks like that that we work with on a day-to-day basis. Having all that expertise in San Antonio is huge, right? And so that's a draw for talent, that's a draw for companies, that's a draw for threats, that's a draw. It puts a big old target on our back as a community, and that's why it takes a community to solve that problem as well. But it's very exciting. We had, our SCDC trip early February, right? Not even a month ago. And the thing we kept hearing in all our meetings is, how are y'all doing it, right? How does San Antonio create these public-private partnerships that are the model for the country? How are y'all doing it? And I think, again, it's just in our community. It's just who we are. And I think when we take that and lay it on top of cybersecurity, information security, privacy issues, it's fascinating to hear at the highest levels that San Antonio folks are looking at us to be that model and to continue that and to have that shared across the U.S. So to Fred's point as well, not keeping that here, right? We want to share that with other communities because those missions impact the world. Our defense missions impact the world. What CPS does impacts the world. It's not just us here in our state. What we're looking at with innovation, what we're looking at with jobs, with education, with partnerships, these are things that have an impact on our world, right? So when we share that with our youth here, seeing that it's bigger than our community, it's bigger than your neighborhood, it's bigger than your family, that's really exciting. And that helps folks get engaged in STEM and get engaged in these careers and provide ideas that we may not see from where we're at.
And Will, what are you seeing at Port San Antonio in terms of benefits or reasons to pursue public-private partnerships to kind of achieve some of these privacy objectives?
Absolutely, and I mean, the port as an entity is in and of itself a unique public-private partnership. A redevelopment of Kelly Air Force Base when it was closed that, kept, maintained, and grew a massive job base there. And I know you started, Aaron, saying let's not talk about San Antonio because I'm sure you wanted to get into specifics on our model, but I think it's something Fred and Amanda and I would all echo. It is those partnerships. Maybe just look, I'll call it CPS Energy right now. You have their CEO in the room. You have new board member Janie Gonzalez, who's CEO of a cybersecurity and tech firm here, and you have Fred. You need that type of leadership triangle from the top down that believes in security, believes in partnerships to enhance that security and resiliency. So from a port side, if you think about our partnership with Cybersecurity San Antonio and the work Amanda's doing from an overall ecosystem, partnership with CPS Energy, to Fred's comments, some of those major Air Force missions sit on Port San Antonio. And of course, we're concerned with them, but we don't manage the grid. And so how do we work with Fred to better understand how we support those efforts from a defense-sensitive grid standpoint? Amanda brought up talent. UTSA, I'm sure we probably have some people from UTSA in the room. Moving forward with the new College of Data Science, the National Security Collaboration Center, really drive that innovation and partnership between government, academia, and industry. And so it's easy to talk about partnerships. I think there's a lot of communities that speak about partnerships, but it kind of takes both the willingness and top-level buy-in and leadership to form those partnerships, but also the existing industrial base and organizations that can really amplify those. And I think that's where San Antonio has a unique kind of launch spot as you talk about smart cities and new technologies and innovation in cybersecurity. We have the military base that over 100 plus years in San Antonio has been open to working and talking and connecting with San Antonio. They don't feel like they're a tenant of our community. They feel like they're a part of our community. We have an energy utility that's probably one of the most progressive and fast-moving in the country that's willing, to the extent they can, to open up what they're doing and how they're looking at things and create those partnerships. So I think it's a neat time in San Antonio because we just have the right leadership in a lot of places that doesn't just talk about those partnerships, but puts resources and financial backing behind those partnerships. And it's not just about national security, but I think that's from the citizen side, people see themselves. How are you securing my data? How are you securing my financial information? But really what San Antonio does that benefits a citizen really benefits global national security operations. So it's very much a dual-pronged need there.
So I'll throw it right back at you and kind of let this conversation go where it's leading, which is talking more particularly about some of these partnerships you're seeing in San Antonio. So Will, what are some of the projects you're seeing going on that really highlight successful public-private partnerships and also data security and privacy?
I mean, there's a long list. I think we could all talk through a long list. I'll mention one because I think we could thread it through in addition to what Amanda and Fred would say. But when you talk about collaborative security here, not just the grid, but our municipal agencies, industry and our municipal governments have talked for years about how do you co-locate, collaborate security operations. You achieve economies of scale, you achieve information sharing at a level probably very few other cities can because of the unique relationship with the city of San Antonio and CPS and our water system, our transportation network. And then how do you take that a step further and tie in the military? And Fred mentioned the CRADA and the work with the Air Force. At the port specifically, we're working with the Air Guard, Texas Air National Guard and the Army Guard. And they have a mission nationally. I think we're all familiar with, national disasters, whether it's a flood, it's a hurricane. That is a system that most states know how the governor activates the Guard and the Guard comes in to support those efforts. I think there are very few states that do that in the same way from an effectiveness standpoint from a cyber attack. If there's a threat, if there's training, remediation, incident response. So how do we build this local municipal collaborative environment, and then how do you tie it into a Guard presence that can then serve as really a model for the state to activate and to share that information? It's easy to talk about information sharing. I know Fred would have his unique perspective from the electrical standpoint. Amanda and I have worked for the last several years on how do you drive that value prop to industry on information sharing outside of some of the national frameworks that exist. And so I think some of what we're doing here from an information sharing standpoint that enhances security and resiliency of critical infrastructure is not just about the local entities, but how does ultimately San Antonio emerge as a model for Texas, which some could argue has the first or second most important grid from a national security standpoint. So some exciting collaboration that's bringing in partners that just traditionally probably haven't collaborated and elsewhere in the United States are not collaborating in the same way.
Yeah, so I'll hop in. So my job is unique, housed in the chamber. We have a Cybersecurity San Antonio program. And so my job is to coordinate everything that targets or touches cyber. So whether that's K-12 education, higher ed, workforce, programs, industries, startups, small businesses, so working with folks like Fred and Will and others, I'm sure Z Prime, Epicenter, other folks that you're going to hear from or have already heard from today. And what does that look like? If you bring all those folks into one room, what are you doing? What's the strategy? What's the marketing plan? How do you brand that? How do we get the word out about San Antonio and all these partnerships that we have? So that's my job, right? It used to be with Will, it was a two-person team. Now I get to call on Will at the port, so it's just me. So if you want to help, let me know. But it's really exciting to have seen the growth over the past 13, 14 months I've been a part of it. Every month we meet. We are organized under 5 core focus areas. We have chairs that volunteer to oversee each of our 5 core focus areas. And it's not necessarily folks you would expect. Industry is there, but so is our higher education community. So is our K-12 community. Some teachers will come. Folks who are not necessarily technical experts, but they're in project management or sales and marketing. So you have all the best minds of San Antonio. I'm sure we're missing a lot, but we're all trying to figure out what does our workforce strategy look like? What does our branding look like? What do we need to share with folks? And then scale that up on an international level. When we have visiting delegations come to San Antonio and they're trying to figure out who are you, how do we plug in, we have that group ready to activate. And I think that's so powerful and it's so unique and again speaks to San Antonio. And I would totally be remiss if I didn't mention at least a challenge, right? Not everything is perfect and great in San Antonio. We're working on it, but it's not there yet. And I would be remiss, I know I saw some of my digital inclusion colleagues in here. Fred mentioned infrastructure, right? We have to have folks connected into broadband infrastructure, and not just connected, but it has to be fast, it has to be dependable, it has to be affordable. That is huge, and that's not just an issue for our community here, but it's one of our biggest issues, and for a community that has so much expertise, there's a lot of responsibility that comes back to us to bridge those gaps, right? To bridge that digital divide, to figure out how to get folks on board and solve that. For our students in particular, There's no reason they should go home and not be able to do their homework and fall behind because of access, right? That's jobs lost, that's monies lost, that's creative power, brain power lost in our community. And I just wanted to raise that as something that we're working on within this group to figure out how do we solve that.
And Fred, you mentioned the Department of Defense. What other projects are you guys working on in terms of public-private partnerships that are you're really seeing grow and you're really excited about for the community?
So I think it's a matter of how we think. I'm a security person, safety person, and you might think that I think in a restricted way, but we have a very dynamic, forward-thinking CEO and executive team here at CPS Energy, and we've led this industry. So we think always about how we can get out in front of problems and being proactive. So it's a matter of how we think to develop the solution sets that we need to be ready for the future. So some of the projects are related to utilization of technology, such as drones for perimeter protection, and being able to parlay that in the future with biometric screening so we can have the ability to determine quickly who's on our property edges, who are they, and do they have a criminal background? Whereas current technologies of the 10 years past wouldn't afford us that kind of opportunity. The other thing is leveraging the fiber network. So collectively in this community, we own the fiber network. So we know that we're moving to 5G. And there's an ability to leverage that for the future. So we have the partnership with the military, and so I think there's a lot of collaboration there as we move towards more of a mesh network to manage our infrastructure in the future, utilizing artificial intelligence to create more of a gamification of where the current is, but it really isn't. So that you'll still be able to have resiliency 100% to the community and the public that we serve. So just in short, some of those projects are what we're working on.
And Amanda, I actually had a follow-up question for you, and I'd like to hear the thoughts from all the panelists on this. What areas within the city, or just not even San Antonio in particular, but just across the U.S., are you seeing better need for solutions, better privacy, more security? Where are you feeling like there really does need to be that focus and really public-private partnerships coming together to start to solve some of these more immediate solutions that really need that help?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think, one of them I already mentioned was access, right? That's huge for us. That's it, right? I think, and that's a struggle for, every community in our country, not just even urban areas like ours. It's pretty massive that we have all these resources. There's also an issue with the rural communities as well, right? I think just access to broadband is huge, and I see that the financial institutions have kind of figured it out, right? They have their laws, they have these incentives and an ROI to kind of prod people to act. I don't know if we have that yet for technology companies, right? I don't know what those incentives look like yet. I don't know what that legislation looks like yet. But that's really exciting for all of us in this room because we have a say in it, right? There's still time to voice, what we think could work or what we can try, or like Fred and Will have said, there are pilot projects within there that we can test out, but it's going to require us to be creative and to have a community approach to that, right? One voice from industry or a heavier voice from industry versus community or schools or anything like that is not going to work. And I think there's an opportunity to lead that. So I would definitely, foot stomp access to broadband and digital inclusion.
And Will, what are you seeing in terms of areas that you'd like to see more solutions, more success?
Sure, and I'll talk about two quick ones, completely second one Amanda's talking about, which is just a very foundational issue, nationwide, not just in San Antonio, but I think something we have to focus on. From a policy standpoint, it will be interesting to watch kind of at the national level, standards, regulations, guidelines as it pertains to cybersecurity in the business community. If you look at healthcare and over time how they've evolved to an understanding and just an assumption that they have to have certain standards of care and patient access and patient data and how they manage that, it's a known in the healthcare space. Right now, you have dozens of different frameworks that have come out of different select committees or the administration. But we hear all the time from business, especially when you get in the small business community, which is San Antonio by and large, they just don't know where to start. Sometimes it's as easy as giving them, a NIST top 10 framework. Just ask either a third-party provider, internal IT or security personnel, are you just doing this as a baseline? But it'll be interesting to see at the national level. Now, of course, speaking from the business perspective, that says don't over-regulate us. But I think there's something needed in the future, a discussion around how does business practice kind of that cyber-safe hygiene, just that minimum viable standard. And then the second piece quickly would be innovation. It's a big word. It's a word that means a lot of things. Everyone in the country is, pushing for innovation. I think, again, for San Antonio, it's how do we do things smartly that capitalize on our unique assets? And we've talked about it a lot here. And even outside of the cybersecurity space, you look at our biomedical industry. We've had some big news recently with Velocity and the Texas Research and Technology Foundation. There's a unique triangle there between academia, UT Health, and what happens in the medical center, and the military, and the private sector. But how do we drive innovation in a way that, frankly, changes the brand San Antonio still has to a lot of people outside of San Antonio? Some of that's because of proximity to Austin. Some of that's because we happen to be located in such a great state with a lot of different hubs for innovation. But I think that'll be a challenge/opportunity for this community going forward. How do we maybe catch up in certain areas, and how do we double down in some of these key unique industries and fund it and resources it and learn how to incentivize R&D and startups and new products and technologies that really matter and are needed by those key industries. So that's something I'm excited about, both from my role at the port, but writ large in San Antonio going forward.
So I think it's also a matter of trade policy. So utilities have complex equity partnerships across the country, and so you've got a number of different players. And some of the issues become that when some of those equity deals become unbundled or sold, and then you have China or Russia buying into that equity partnership, now all of a sudden you've given the keys to the state actor. So we know from national data sources that China and Russia are number one, number two, whatever, how you want to count it, in terms of threat actors. And that's going to be the reality. If we can do nothing, and China is going to be number one in GDP by 2021. We know that from our sources at the DOD and the DOE. So we've got to do everything we can in this competition framework to protect our interests to the best extent possible. And I think thinking broadly, thinking big picture, that's what we need to be targeting ourselves for. Also with R&D, in the public power space, our funds are sometimes limited in terms of what we can or can't do. And I think if we're looking towards high-tech companies and developing a honey net type environment in a test bed where we can test new technology, we can catch threat actors, we can have the advance of being able to turn them over to the DOJ. That's the kind of space we need to be thinking. That's the kind of space we need to be in.
Well, that is going to wrap it up for this panel discussion. Please, everyone, join me in thanking Will, Amanda, and Fred for joining us today. Thank you all.
Thank you.